I've been seeing way too many good movies lately. I feel like I need to watch some bad ones to balance it out. You know, I'm not complaining about all the good movies, but I feel like my sample pool's a little skewed. Yorgos Lanthimos is not so slowly becoming one of my favorite directors. The Lobster blew me away 2 years ago, and ever since I've just been inhaling his work, which is why I went and saw The Favorite at the New York Film Festival, which was its US premiere. Now technically I didn't see the US premiere. That showing was at 6:30 and there was a Q&A with Yorgos Lanthimos and I think Emma Stone was there. I caught a smaller showing with no Q&A about half an hour later. So technically I saw the second US showing of this film. And wow. For a period piece, I can already tell this film is going to sweep the technical categories. Production design, costume design, hair and makeup, all that good stuff. It's not just that they were impressive period sets and period costumes, because I've kind of come to expect that a proper period piece will already have those. I'm probably taking it for granted, but that's just an expectation of mine at this point. But there are so many little things that cater to the absurd nature of the film. Stuff like eggplant earrings. You know, it's all these small things that really pushes the film above and beyond typical period piece attire. And the sets, aside from being impressive palace sets, have such a macabre nature to them, which is kind of ironic because the film wasn't nearly as dark as I expected it to be. Not that I was disappointed by that. Looking at his last three films, The Lobster is kind of a balance between seriously dark and comedically dark. The Killing of a Sacred Deer has dark comedy, but it's mostly serious. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, this film is a comedy. Not in a bad way, though. Not that the tension is broken by the comedy. It's more like Phantom Thread, where it uses comedy to convey its heavier, more serious themes, and the tension in this film is still incredibly powerful. I don't know how Lanthimos does it. Year after year, he's been in such command of the films he's released. His direction is top-notch. This film is a little different. He's toned down the monotone delivery, which I realize is an ironic statement, but what I mean is the actors convey a lot more emotion in their dialogue and their mannerisms than in Lanthimos' previous films. That said, it's still very much a Yorgos Lanthimos film. It's still jam-packed with idiosyncrasies. And I think this film is actually a great example of the difference between a quirky film and an idiosyncratic film. Quirky, I think, is more of an aesthetic term, whereas idiosyncratic implies that there is a meaning or theme hidden under all these small things. Looking at Wes Anderson, for instance, he's kind of a mixed bag of quirks and idiosyncrasies, but I think Lanthimos is mostly idiosyncratic, although I'd argue that the dialogue in The Killing of a Sacred Deer is quirkier than it is idiosyncratic. And just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with quirkiness. I don't want this to become a thing where, like, pretentious people use idiosyncratic and only normies use quirky, like, I don't watch movies, I watch films. No, they're just very similar words with slightly different meanings. Moving past that digression, Lanthimos approached this film with an aesthetic affinity for extremes. There are shots with extremely open exposure, the highlights just dominating the frame. He uses these crazy wide-angle lenses, some of which are so extreme you can see both ends of a hallway or a road within the same frame. And sometimes he uses these crazy wide-angle lenses and opens the exposure up at the same time. The title design pushes the centering of text to its extreme. There are even shots that are really dark and have extreme noise. That, however, I found to be a little distracting, and I probably would have preferred if he used a little more light in those scenes. That said, it didn't happen that often, and mostly the shots were astonishing. Even the editing is extreme. We have these extreme J and L cuts that begin before the scene is over or carry on after the next scene has begun. There are scenes in this film that we hear the audio for as early as the previous scene begins. The film is broken up into chapters, and the first chapter has a very clear first act structure. This whole first act, they're just setting up dominoes, and as soon as the first chapter ends, and we see the title card for the second chapter, it's like they put this elaborate domino setup into motion, and we see the rivalry between Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz's characters develop and play out. I will say that the third act of this film could have been a bit shorter. They dragged out some of the events just a little too much. That said, I was having such a good time watching this movie that I didn't even mind all that much. The very last shot of this movie layers so many different images over each other. I feel like the word trippy is probably selling it kind of short. There's so much information the film is giving us, letting us ponder the conclusion of the film. It's amazing. This is really a perfect companion piece to Barry Lyndon, which also criticizes 18th century English royalty. Naturally, the sets and costumes have a lot of similarities, but where Barry Lyndon tried to recreate the era as authentically as possible and have chastisable characters within this authentic setting, The Favorite, in addition to a lot of authenticity, portrays this era in a sort of heightened reality, layering on a decent amount of absurdism. There's a scene where Rachel Weisz's character Sarah is dancing with some guy, I don't remember if it was Nicholas Hoult or not, and the way the dance is framed and lensed, and the actual choreography of the dance itself, is so ridiculous. It's like Yorgos Lanthimos is physically standing there, laughing in the face of 18th century royalty. So needless to say, this film is far less subtle than Barry Lyndon. Not that that's a bad thing, they're just different ways of approaching the subject matter. There's even a scene in this movie that almost directly recreates the recital scene from Barry Lyndon. The three best performances this year are all in this movie. I thought Emma Stone was pretty good in La La Land. I didn't think her role was very demanding, nor her character all that complex. She did as much as she could with it. But this is the performance that makes her worthy of being an Academy Award winner. She's incredible here, as is Rachel Weisz, and Olivia Colman does such an amazing job taking a character that could very easily be a caricature and breathing so much humanity into her. Not only are these the three strongest performances, but also the three strongest characters I've seen this year. They're each so dynamic on their own, but as a three-person group, the dynamics among each other are so richly layered and complex. I haven't seen a pair of characters as diametrically opposed as Abigail and Sarah since There Will Be Blood, probably. Just such a strong understanding of who these people are by everyone working on the film. So these two are certainly strong characters opposing each other, and then we have Olivia Colman's character, Queen Anne, who's in the middle, and she's really more of a vehicle, or even more so a MacGuffin for these two to fight over. That said, it's totally unclear which of any of the three of these people are the main character. Anne probably has the most screen time, but it's Abigail and Sarah who are battling for her, and even then, they have equal screen time and development. Naturally, I'd say we want to view Sarah as the protagonist and Abigail as the antagonist, but none of these characters are good or bad. The film starts out and Sarah's being ruthlessly mean to Anne. Meanwhile, we see Abigail is thrown in the mud, she's jerked off to, we see her sleeping on the ground, she burns her hand, she's got this messed up backstory, so immediately we have these associations with the characters. But then we see how much of Sarah's rudeness is out of love, and we see just how conniving Abigail can be. But not all of Sarah's behavior is out of love. She's equally as conniving as Abigail, and we totally see where Abigail is coming from going into this situation. So there's a lot of moral ambiguity going on, which, as you probably know, I have a weakness for. I can't help but love a good, morally ambiguous story. As I mentioned, each of these characters is acted to perfection. I almost feel bad for Nicholas Hoult because he's got a great character and he gives a good performance, but he's so outstaged by the main three that it's easy to forget he's even in the movie. At first, I was surprised to find that this was a Fox Searchlight film and not A24, considering it's Yorgos Lanthimos. And then I found out that Yorgos Lanthimos didn't write the script for this film, which was even more surprising because he's always written his own scripts. But even more surprising than that is who the screenwriters are. Believe me when I tell you that this is the strongest script of the year, stronger even than probably any film that came out last year, and it was written by two people named Deborah Davis and Tony McNamara. This is Davis's only IMDb credit, and it looks like McNamara was mostly just a staff writer on some not very popular TV shows. He also wrote and directed an Australian film called The Rage in Placid Lake, which received mixed reviews, as well as a film called Ashby, which received less than stellar reviews. Who are these people, and how did they write such a phenomenal script? And if they are well-known people, then how come I didn't know about them? And how come this is Davis's only IMDb credit? It makes no sense. It doesn't add up. I can't wrap my mind around it. The script is too good for nobodies to have written. It doesn't make sense. Not only is the character writing in this film god tier, but it's endlessly quotable. There's a scene where this guy walks into Abigail's room and she asks him, "Are you here to seduce me or rape me?" And he goes, "I'm a gentleman." And she goes, "So rape it is then." That's the kind of humor that's persistent throughout the whole film. It's so fresh and biting, and there are so many great one-liners like that. Despite the fact that Lanthimos didn't write this script, I totally understand why he chose to direct it. It's thematically consistent with his other films. And here I'm going to get into a few spoilers, so if you don't want to hear, go to this time. So in the end, Abigail becomes a lady and Sarah is exiled from England, and their final interaction totally changes the way we view this whole dispute. Sarah's about to leave, and she says to Abigail, "You really think you've won?" And Abigail says something like, "Haven't I?" And Sarah says, "We're playing very different games." Now at first I thought this meant that Sarah had some plan to win back Anne's affection and somehow defeat Abigail, but then I realized that no more had to be done. I watched the last shot as Abigail is rubbing Anne's legs, and their faces are juxtaposed on top of each other as the shots of rabbits layer and layer, and then the movie ends. My very initial reaction was, oh, it's over? But as the credits rolled, the image suddenly made sense. Or maybe not the image, but the ending. I realized that that moment was the film's logical conclusion. Abigail thought she had won because she was now a lady and thus untouchable, but was that really what the battle was over? What now that she's a lady? Keep faking love for the queen? Sarah has that whole monologue about how she tells Anne when she looks like a badger because she loves her, and Anne realizes, now that Sarah's been exiled, that she messed up. She lost her love, and now she's stuck with Abigail, who she now realizes has been using her this whole time. And Abigail knows that Anne knows, and now they're stuck in this awkward relationship, the rabbits serving as a constant reminder of Abigail's fake love. And this is the game that Sarah was talking about, and really Sarah won, because she's still the one that Queen Anne loves. And Abigail may be a lady now, but that doesn't mean anything other than a better bed to sleep in, better clothes to wear, and better food to eat. Which is heartbreaking, but you realize that Abigail put herself in this position by using the queen, and it's just such a beautiful conclusion, juggling so many different, contradictory feelings. The direction and performances are great in this movie, but it's really the script above everything else that impressed me. Here's my prediction, and there are many films I haven't seen yet this year. This film is going to win Best Production Design and Best Costume Design. Yorgos Lanthimos will be nominated for Best Director. Robbie Ryan will be nominated for Best Cinematography. The film will be nominated for Best Hair and Makeup and Best Film Editing. Nicholas Hoult will be nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Any of these three actresses, hopefully all three of them, will be nominated for Best Lead Actress. One of them will win. If any of them are nominated for Best Supporting Actress, she will win. The film will be nominated for Best Picture. Now, awards are arbitrary, but I do believe that they're somewhat important in recognizing talented artists, and while Lanthimos has been snubbed in the past, the Academy has a certain affection for period pieces, and I think this will be the Lanthimos film to catch their attention. For me, it's a super strong 9 out of 10, but I'd like to watch it a few more times before I can confidently decide whether or not it's worthy of being a 10 out of 10. It's a very close second to The Lobster, but all of his films are so good it's really hard to compare. See this movie. If not for yourself, then for me. And if you have seen it, then let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.